The Collaborating Conversation podcast is for avid book readers, book lovers, and authors. Listen to this podcast as we talk more about the art of writing, stories behind books, and the hands that created them. So stay tuned and enjoy our show.
Welcome to the Collaborating Conversations podcast. Today's episode is a deep dive into alien invasion in sci-fi. Got an interesting topic for today, diving into different types of alien invasion sci-fi novels and shows and games. I think this is one of those classic tropes where, it's like thinking of First Contact type of situations where it goes bad.
So that's an interesting question, right? How come in a lot of books in science fiction, when an alien invasion, it's typically an invasion or it's typically bad? I can only think of one book out of the list we talked about, which was the Death Worlders, where Earth is not the bad guys, but we're the overpowered, strongest, like everybody else is like weak because we grew up in a world where we are death, like our world is bred to kill us, versus like a lot of the other traditional alien invasions, they try to kill us. Now, is that just because it's a good storytelling arc, or do we find that striving for survival and striving to push through to stay alive is kind of one of those inherent human traits that make for good storytelling?
It's an interesting one. I think it's human nature, right? Like we assume that, like we did through human history, like when a superior force interacts with an inferior force, the superior force seeks to subjugate, take over, or destroy the inferior force. They talk about this in the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. One of the things that's revealed, I think it's in the second novel, is that humanity almost conquered the galaxy twice. And so it's like, everyone was afraid of humans, and it was very interesting because everyone viewed humans as like these almost animalistic, like horrible, vengeful monsters, and that couldn't help but be violent. And so all the aliens throughout the whole series, they're afraid of the aliens. They're afraid they're afraid of humans. They're afraid that humans are going to, if a human appears, like their life is in jeopardy and dangerous. And so it's an interesting play because it kind of puts humans in a negative light, even though the story is told from the perspective of a human as they encounter these different aliens who are afraid of them.
Afraid of the humans, or we are afraid of the aliens? So
it's funny because we're, the humans are, it's an interesting story. So like with Skyward, the first book, humanity lives in these like subterranean tunnels, and they're constantly attacked by these aliens that are just seeking to wipe them out. And, and so at first it seems like the humans are in this terrible situation where they're just trying to survive. And it later comes to light that, that the attacks are actually by wardens that are just trying to keep the human population in control and whittle down their forces so that they don't pose a threat to the broad galactic civilization. And so they, it's like a prison world, but that's not revealed until the second book. And so, it's interesting because when the humans actually get out, but it's interesting because the aliens think that humans are terrible and they're afraid of them, and they're afraid of the humans getting out, and when the humans eventually do, they think they have to resort to extreme measures to wipe the humans out because they've escaped from their cage essentially. And so it's just an interesting play on that whole narrative of alien invasion, because what first starts out like an alien invasion book ends up turning around to be like, the galaxy was invaded by humans, and now the galaxy is just trying to keep the humans contained so they don't wipe them out. And so it's an interesting play on that whole concept.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. So that's actually what happens in Death Worlders as well. Within the first chapters, somebody breaks the air quotes covenant rules, or whatever the rules are for I don't know the right terminology, but the world, the galactic organization,
yeah.
Where they put a bubble on Earth and they try to contain the entire Earth in this bubble because Earth is basically a death world. So essentially everything on Earth, air quotes, evolved to, so everything on Earth evolved, in the book to basically kill humans. So that's why our world is considered like a 12 where no life should be on the world, but humans are so resilient and so whatnot. We're stronger. So the guns that they have in the rest of the universe basically kill everybody else. Like they like obliterate their chest and basically like jellify them, and they barely knock us out. So like everyone's terrified, and like it messes with the balance of the galaxy. So some rogue group tries to put Earth in a bubble, but some other rogue group gives us a wormhole and we can get out.
Yeah, they play around that concept with Star Trek, the new one, Discovery, where that one alien is his species was actually the prey on the planet, and so they they were a prey species, and so they had evolved essentially in the story to become, to try to survive, and they were known as like a fearful species that thought everything was out to eat them.
Most of them play on like fear of the unknown, right? Because the whole thing with aliens is that we don't know who they are. But
yeah, I think that's interesting. That's kind of the premise of like the Independence Day movies, right? It's like this overpowering alien force shows up. They're ominous, and then they just start destroying the world. And it's not revealed until a later movie that they came out with that the aliens were trying to harvest the core of the Earth or whatever, and so like their first step was wiping out all life and then harvesting the planet. But it's like they show up and they're like this species that you don't know anything about. They don't interact with humans, and their first interaction is just to destroy everything. But I think that that also plays on how we think about other humans, right? It's like the moment you think about the moment you get to know someone, it's harder to kill them, right? You can't demonize them as much when you actually get to know them as another living, breathing being. And so it's an interesting concept, I think, in general, where it's like it has to be this unknowing force that doesn't interact in order to justify wiping out.
Right, but to what Max was saying, right? It's the unknown. In a lot of these books, humans kind of do the same thing because I don't know. So here's a anecdotal survey question: in most science fiction, do the humans automatically think the aliens are out to get them? Or is there evidence that the aliens are out to get them, right? So in Independence Day, there's no notice of that until they shoot the laser, right? Until they start attacking. In other science fiction and other stuff like Halo, it's more they do attack first. But is there any sense of humans attacking first, or because we're not sure? I'm kind of thinking Skippies, right? In the Expeditionary Force, we kind of attack first, but we also we get attacked and then we're forced to attack someone else. But we really don't know what's going on.
On Columbus Day,
right?
And that starts the war.
Gotta love the hamsters.
Yeah. But I think even then, like when you learn more about the premise, like they attacked humanity first because they thought, I forget, it came out later in the book, like they thought humanity was already working in league with the enemy, or had the opportunity to work in league with the enemy or something like that. So that's why they attacked humanity first. I forget.
No, it was gonna be that the hamsters attacked first, so that they could disable their power function, so that they would not be a good target for the lizards.
That's right.
It was a preemptive strike so that no one would target us, or no one would want to be our enemy, or no one would want to do anything.
Yeah, kind of neutralized before they became a threat that could be used by the enemy, which ends up happening anyway.
So interesting thing, at least for the most part, as far as I can recall, the focus is usually put, and I would say I probably watch more like movies, shows than read books about aliens. But the focus, or at least there's a major emphasis on the perspective of the humans and versus the perspective of the aliens, right? Do you think that plays a role in how, I guess, the emotional reaction that comes as a result of like going through the content?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So like in the sci-fi, told from the perspective of the aliens.
Right. So the major plot, like the template, from what I can tell, right? So alien comes, humans are, scared or they're a bit wary, and while they may not necessarily like attack or whatever, it's one of those things where the aliens are walking on eggshells, whether they realize it or not. Then at the first sign, I mean, if they will make a wrong move, then the humans react, and then it becomes this whole thing until at the end they find out, oh well, there was a misunderstanding or blah blah blah, or the aliens end up going back, or the aliens end up subduing the humans. I mean, everything is possible from that point. But just from arrival until conflict, the focus is usually on how the humans see things, and there's never any sort of like preview on why the aliens came in the first place.
Actually, there is one book that comes to mind, The Three Body Problem, by Cixin Liu. It's a Chinese novel that's been translated. Really good sci-fi book. I've only read the first one, but there's a whole series. And the whole premise of the first book is there's this video game. And it's based off of the premise of this trying to solve the three body problem. And just for some background, so the three body problem is if you have three solar masses in a solar system, how do you survive as a planet in those in that environment? Because essentially, like, depending on the orbiting of the three suns, at some point, like when all three suns are close to the planet because of the type of orbit, the suns will combined wipe out all life on the planet. So here's the actual physics. So in physics and classical mechanics, the three body problem is the problem of taking the initial positions and velocities or momentum of 3-point masses and solving for their subsequent motion according to Newton's law of motion and Newton's law of universal gravitation. So in the three body problem book, those three masses are three suns. And so, like, with those three suns rotating around each other and a planet rotating around those three suns, how does a species that's evolved to exist in that environment survive, right? And then the whole premise of the book, the first book is like they're in this game and they're trying, and they have this species and they're trying to solve this game, trying to beat this game. And it really is just showing the people who are playing the game the life of this alien species that's learned to evolve, to adapt in this environment. And it's a horrible, hostile environment where essentially, like, the aliens, can like reduce their drain all the moisture out of their body and become like these hibernating creatures that can be stored in underground shelters deep in the earth, that can wake up, in like a couple hundred years once the planet has recovered from being close to multiple suns or something like that. And it's and throughout the whole book, like, you're just trying to figure out, why it's like showing you this video of the species. And then it comes to light that, the big reveal is that there is an alien species that has survived in this environment, and they've discovered Earth, and they've discovered that Earth does not exist in the horrible, hostile environment that they exist in. And therefore they're going to conquer Earth and relocate their species to Earth. And so, but like, they're this hyper advanced species, and basically it's actually crazy. They lock down humanity's ability to progress in physics. And so because humanity can't progress past a certain level in like physics understanding, they can never, the book one ends off with like humanity not being able to prepare to progress to the level that they can actually defend against the aliens who are on just a whole other level and like their understanding of the universe and physics. And so it's just like this mind blowing, like, oh man, it's truly doomed.
So tangent, does anyone remember a Stargate SG-1 episode with a similar premise? Essentially they didn't block them or stop their level or like block their physics or knowledge. They actually gave everybody everything freely, and we accepted it. But what we didn't know it was doing was making everyone sterile so that the Earth population was slowly declining over like a 3-decade period. Does anyone remember that episode or know what I'm talking about?
I remember that one.
Yeah, it was one of, I think, the later ones that kind of really stuck out to me because Samantha Carter had to go back in time through a Stargate with a solar flare in order to stop the species, because they came in thinking, oh, we're benevolent, we're just going to give you all our technology, right? But in reality, the technology is what was causing us to become sterile or non-productive, or I forget exactly how the story was told, but essentially it was causing us to no longer procreate and no longer be a threat, which is a very interesting way to attack a species versus like the book you were mentioning, where they just stop our knowledge, they stop our way of understanding, versus another way to stop is to slowly mess with society. And the sad thing is we're actually seeing that today, where like China's birth rates are declined because they did the one child policy and all this other stuff. And then even though we like to think of I can't remember the movie. What is it called? The movie Idiocracy. But it's actually true where smarter people have less kids because they know how much responsibility and how much work it takes. And so the more you become a higher end country, the less kids you actually have. So it's kind of this weird, interesting, like, are we doing this to ourselves type of thing? Or, instead of this case, like you were talking about, like they're just like, nope, you can't have anything past this. You're done.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just reading the episode synopsis. I don't remember this episode, but that's crazy. Yeah, like that's like long-term invasion. I feel like that's a premise that I've seen in other movies or books where it's like a long-term invasion where like they're originally seen as like a savior or solving all of humanity's problems, and then eventually like humanity just ceases to exist, or like the plan is revealed that they've taken over everything. I know what was it, Earth Final Conflict? You remember that show? It was a long time ago. The Talons, I think is what they were called. But that was I think that was how their species conquered, and so they came to Earth, and they were viewed as like saviors. It was back in 1997. That's when their Final Conflict came out. It was an old sci-fi series, and like they essentially came to Earth, and they had established relationships with the Earth and all the major governments, and had like these big motherships that were like in orbit around the planet. But it later comes out through the series that they're actually just using humanity, and that they've like slowly taken over control, and then like they're able to see the history of the species, and they discover that other species have been taken over by the Talons, and they've used them to like further their empire. And it's like this big shocking reveal. But yeah, that's an interesting premise where it's just like it's an alien invasion, but under the skies of like helping humanity.
Well, benevolence, right? Because
Looking for an exciting space adventure book, a romantic young adult story, and a fantastic sci-fi read? Get The Fondra by award-winning author Emmanuel M. Arriaga today, and prepare to feed your imagination with never-ending thrill ride.
Well, it's interesting because it plays against our psyche, where we want to believe someone who is higher knowledge than us is going to want to help us, right? But do we really know? But then half of ourselves wants to say, oh yeah, they're totally going to help us. And the other half of us is like, nah, man, I don't trust them. And it's very interesting how that creates very good and compelling stories.
Well, I think it's a retelling of human history, right? Like, in many ways, like it's us retelling human history, because if you look, like the whole concept of colonization, right? Where it's like you go to in days past, like, you go to a quote unquote less advanced, continent or place, and then you colonize them, you bring your culture to, civilize them, right? Well, it's like the same premise except from aliens, right? Like the aliens come, but the colonization is actually like they're just coming to exploit the resources of that new place, in exchange for quote unquote, civilization, right? And then like aliens could in turn do that to us. It's an interesting thought experiment, right? Like, imagine humanity as being the alien invader going to another alien, right? Like, what would the result of that first contact look like? Like, would it be akin to human colonization on Earth, except
I was going to say that
species, or would it be different?
I would say colonization is probably the closest thing.
Probably due to our just massive amount of fear, but it also depends on, right? Because the biggest problem. So if we the biggest problem for aliens is going to be communication, right? Because that's one of the things that science fiction does, is where communication is kind of hand waved where they figure it out. One of the few that I like where they figure it out is Project Hail Mary, and I'm not going to spoil it. They have to go through a whole process to learn how to communicate. And I think that's going to be the key. If we ever, outside of science fiction, meet aliens or whatever, communication is going to be key, right? Because isn't that a lot of sci-fi tropes are, oh, we miscommunicate with the aliens. We tried to say something, benign, and they took it as like, your mother is a cockroach and your mother is a cockroach and I fart in her general direction, they took it as an insult when we're just trying to communicate. I think communication is the biggest problem, because I'm remembering from Independence Day where they send the helicopter with lights and they shoot it down, right? I don't remember if there's a problem with lights, but that was our attempt to communicate.
This was the premise of the movie Arrival. I don't know if either one of you has seen that movie.
The name sounds familiar.
I don't believe I have.
So the whole premise of Arrival is that this super advanced alien species arrives in these big ships, and they have this room in their ships where they like come and show symbols, and then eventually like humanity sends a linguist, and so the main character of the story is a linguist, and they the whole premise of the movie is they're trying to figure out the language of the aliens and communicate with them, because the aliens are trying to communicate with humanity. And so the linguist is the linguist ends up just slowly working out their language, and then discovers like their language is like so advanced that it's actually allows like time travel and stuff like that when you fully understand their language. Which is an interesting play on like the power of language, right? Like, we think about language and like what we're speaking now, right, with English, but it's just like, could our society eventually progress to a level where language itself has the power to speak things into existence, right? Like from a level of, understanding of the universe that does not currently exist today, right? Like we can actually use language itself to like, manipulate things, right? Like, it's the whole premise behind like magic, right? Like in fantasy, like you understand, there are certain words that manipulate magic or, allow the twisting of the universe. Like, I know this happens in Foundry, right? With the words of power. So like with the anesmic flow, like I played around with the concept of like, there are certain words of power that can be spoken to manipulate the anesmic flow in a way to, cause it to do things, to manipulate it in certain ways. Not all manipulation of anesmic energy requires words of power, but words of power, unlock more advanced capabilities.
Well, and that's the thing with language, right? So even in English, which is like the primary world language, we can't always communicate everything we're trying to communicate, right? Because in different languages, you sometimes have multiple words to say the same thing, or you have a male or female version of a word to say something, right? And so it's so interesting. And then when you combine that with, your magic or your fantasy elements, like Lord of the Rings, right? Oh, you say certain things to like you said, the words of power and stuff. And it's so fascinating how we develop language, how we have such a variety of language, and then how do we use language to tell a story?
Yeah, I mean, in a ways, language has power today, right? Like words you say can affect someone emotionally.
Only if it's on Twitter.
Yeah. But even in that sense,
I'm sorry.
But even in that sense, words have power, right? Like you saying a word can bring someone low or bring someone high. So like we've mastered the ability of words to influence people's emotions, right? And we don't think about that often, right? Where it's like our words actually do have power. Like the whole concept of sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me is completely a lie, right? like right. And so it's like words do have power.
No, I think
in a sense, right? Like words have power, in a world that is technologically advanced, right? Like even today, you speak to your assistant, right? And it will do something or say something, or you can, like I can right now turn off, if my stove is on, I can tell my assistant to turn off the stove, right? And that's manipulating things in my environment, right? Like, unlocking doors, opening blinds, turning things on and off, right? Like today, my voice has the ability to do that. What are things going to look like in the future where technology is so ingrained and so much more advanced? And maybe, words, that's the actual manifestation of words truly having power, right? Because you use words to manipulate the real environment through technology. And we eventually get to that point where, words do actually have power to change the world around us in a way that we can't even imagine.
This is kind of a tangent, but this is where I definitely think like this is going to happen, right? So like I envision the future where you need something created and I'm like, hey, insert artificial intelligence AGI name here. Design me a rack mounted pen holder that zip ties to my metal rack over there in the corner. Command, and then it's like, oh, command accepted. Here you go. It'll be done in 4 hours.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's definitely going to happen. Like, I don't know why, but I think people aren't realizing, nope, that's definitely going to be the future. Might not happen right off the bat. I mean, look at, speaking of words and power, look at, have any of you played with Dolly 2?
I have.
That's literally turning words into artwork, right? You're typing out something. And you are turning the words in your mouth, not in your mouth, but you're turning the words that you write into photos. Like that's an amazing, like kind of, I don't want to say power, but it's an amazing democratization of artwork. Because like, I'm never going to be able to draw half the stuff without putting in hours and hours and hours of work. And I can have an idea in my head and now, it's done, right? Like I don't have to worry about it anymore. Like, the idea is out of my head. Sweet.
Yeah. I think it's, kind of tying it back to alien invasions, right? Like, I think looking at, another species that comes here, being able to manipulate the world around you, or them being able to manipulate the world around them from spoken words, even if we don't understand those words, would appear like magic, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know if you played the game Horizon Zero Dawn or.
I'm only like a few hours in, so no spoilers.
Well, the technology that she uses in that game, the
agents.
I forget what it's called. The thing on her head. But that device, it allows her to interact with the ancient technology, which is essentially just like AR technology that exists in the world that allows for touch controls, right? But only when you have, it's the focus. It's called the focus. So when you use the focus, right, like it opens your whole world to this whole world that's, hidden behind the scenes and that you don't even realize. And it's a pretty cool like take on sci-fi because it's like that technology is not that far away from where we are today.
Not at all.
But the application of it is like life altering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about that, in terms of how the world how an alien might use technology similar to that to speak things or interact with things that we can't see, maybe states of matter, or things that we don't perceive, right? Like, or alternate dimensions, or things that are that exist in a space that we exist in, but that we can't interact with or comprehend, right? That world, would be terrifying, right? For like an alien that can come in and do that, because it would just be like, for us, and it talks to that whole premise, I think, with the alien invasion trope in general, where it's like, any species that's advanced enough to travel across the stars and come to our planet today is so far ahead of us technologically that it's unrealistic that we'd be able to put up any fight at all against them.
Yep.
And I think that kind of, it gives like a false hope, like a lot of the alien invasion stories that are modern day, right? Because it's just like, if a super advanced alien species could arrive on our doorstep, there would be no hope for us. But like, that doesn't make for a good story, because it would be humanity lost, right? And it was swift,
Well, and I think that's one of the things is, right, a lot of these stories that we read, humans want hopeful stories, right? Like I remember reading the book Limitless, which the ending in the movie, and this is a spoiler for anyone who hasn't read the book, in the book he dies, and it's like, this is a terrible ending. Like, you're gonna kill off the main character at the end of your book, and it's just like, this sucks. Like, it's an unsatisfying ending. Whereas in the movie Limitless, he survives and then he thrives and becomes like mayor and starts running for president, right? So yeah, we need those like hopeful stories, because reality is difficult enough, and half the time things don't work out the way we want. But then do these stories set us up for failure because we expect this hope to work even though the stats are against us, right? Totally off topic, but I was watching an episode of The Simpsons while I was playing a video game. And it was the first episode, I think, where they bet all their money on the dog, because that was their last hope, because he didn't get a Christmas bonus. He only had $13, and so he bet it all. And then even Bart was like, oh yeah, this is going to be the Christmas miracle. We just got to wait for it. Instead, they lost everything and ended up getting a dog, right? And so it's like, why are the endings where we succeed against the odds so satisfying when that's not actually a good example of reality?
Yeah. I think it's like the whole villain winning, right? Like the whole, like I've seen, we saw what happens when that happens in the real world, right? Like when the Avengers Endgame, right?
And that's exactly what I was thinking.
Thanos wins, right? Like everyone was disheartened and broken. That movie was over, right? Because they lost, like Thanos won, right? And so it's like, I feel like, because in the world, generally people feel like the good things don't always happen. A lot of times when we look at like entertainment, if it's not the good guys winning or a happy ending, at least in the US, like we don't know how to handle it. I know in other countries, they don't always have happy endings. And it's truly more of an American thing, which I didn't realize, for like the whole premise of a happy ending. Like the rest of the world, it's not always happy endings. And I think that, because they tend to be more realistic around like how the world works, right?
But Americans love a good underdog story.
Yeah.
Like America was, we're built on the underdog story, or, we love the underdog in the football game, or I hadn't thought about that, but culturally, like we are not designed, but we're built upon, the underdog always overcoming the David and Goliath, right?
Yeah. Is there any sci-fi series where humanity is just completely and utterly destroyed by an alien invasion?
I can't think of anything right now, but it also depends on what do you mean by utterly destroyed. Like, I think there's a lot of them that start off that way, but it's to build up and overtake, right? Because the Expedition Force kind of starts with us getting our cans kicked, right? Like we have to leave a whole platoon on the hamster world that's getting evicted.
Yeah.
And so it kind of starts out that way, but it's not a complete destroyed. It's definitely we're kind of screwed.
Yeah, I think the closest thing that comes to mind is Skyward, because in that instance, like humanity lost. But even then, like humanity still exists it would be an interesting story to write of, maybe I'll take this on one day of just, having a story that takes place from the perspective of the alien conquerors in the future as they're dealing with, future things, but they've wiped out humanity and taken over Earth. Right. It sounds like,
could you imagine being in charge of Earth? Do you know how much of a headache that would be?
Well, if you wipe out humanity, like, what's wrong?
You all know, but that would make it a great story, right? Like there's pockets of rebellions, or like you can't get rid of it, like how in the Matrix, Agent Smith calls us a virus. So make it that we're virus-like. We always just pop up when you don't want us to, and so they try to like have to build an antivirus to like defend against us.
Well, no, but I mean like writing a story from the premise of just like humanity is gone, humanity was wiped out, right?
Interesting.
And then like, you could have it, have it from the premise of like an alien species, like learning how to live on Earth without the presence of humans. And like, this hostile alien world that's different from anything they know, but they've wiped out all traces of humans, and the people who understand the world. But
they backed up all the YouTube videos. So they backed up all their data. So they have to watch how to do a world with YouTube.
This makes me think of like I Am Legend, right? And I think it'll be an interesting plot twist. They only kept one or two, like a couple of folks, just to sort of like show them around, right? And say, okay, what is the infrastructure in place? And if we're going off the fact that the aliens are advanced, or they're smarter than the human, then it's probably safe to assume that they would probably want to build upon the already existing infrastructure instead of starting all over.
It depends on how advanced they are, but I kind of like where Emmanuel's going with this, because his idea is basically all humans are gone. So you have to pull together information from like an archivist standpoint, right? So like you'd have to archive or pull data from like wreckage, or like pull whatever was cloned at the time of invasion. Because depending on the technology though, I would think starting over would be easier, right? Because right now we don't have replicator technology, right? But if you had a replicator or like industrial 3D printers where you could 3D print infrastructure, 3D build anything you needed, 3D print. Why would you need to build stuff the way we build it, right?
I mean, you would still want, even if you were to start over, you would still want to what's currently available to see what you want to keep, or if you wouldn't want to keep anything.
Well, are you talking about keeping it or keeping the raw resources? Because I think the raw resources would be valuable. The copper, the steel, the coal, other raw material. But depending on their processes and whatnot, they could just grind it all over, all up and pull everything out they need.
Yeah, I mean, if it's an alien event stuff where they get to Earth and they wipe out humanity pretty quickly, like I think our infrastructure is not going to help them in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So I think like they would essentially like rip everything out. And
what do you think of the archivist idea though? Like a historian came to Earth because the Galactic Federation requires that any death of a species be archived.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting premise. I think it would be like exploring or like Earth is a ruins.
Yeah.
And like there are colonies on Earth now, but like they've left the ruins of Earth, because they've become, national preserves.
Yeah, or galactic reserves.
Where it's like they have to leave the ruins of humanity, since humanity no longer exists, for preservation of, what humans once were. I won't spoil anything for Horizon Zero Dawn. You need to get through that game quickly so we can talk about it, because
okay, so this is a side tangent that we might need to cut from the episode, but I like the beginning of the game, but it's just so much work to get through it. There's so many side quests and so much other stuff to do.
Don't do the side quests, just do the story quests.
Yeah, but you got to build all the stuff, and I don't know. It's just too much work.
Like I kind of halted on playing through the sequel because it is a lot of time, and I do want to do the side quests, but it does take a lot of time. But if you power through the main story, like you can get through it like in under 40 hours.
That's still a lot of time. I could watch the cutscenes on YouTube in like half the time.
I usually do that for the first game. I didn't plan to play the first game because I don't have the time, and so but I wanted to know the story because I was playing through the second game, so I watched the story for the entire first game so that I could know know where things left off at the start of the second game, and it was a good story.
Oh, so is that a question? Was Mass Effect, did the humans get almost annihilated in Mass Effect?
So Mass Effect is a bit different. I was thinking about that earlier because Mass Effect, humanity's further along than we are now. So like Mass Effect takes place was 200 years in the future?
I don't remember.
Let's see, Mass Effect timeline.
Side note, can
2183.
2183.
So Mass Effect 1 takes place in 2183. So 100 it's over 160 years in the future.
Yeah.
So humanity is already a spacefaring species when they make first contact with the Turians, and that's the first war. So the Turians and the humans, when they first meet, first conflict does not go well, and they end up going to war with each other, and that led to the first contact war. I forget what it was called, but that's a key moment in the Mass Effect timeline. But humanity in that instance is already a spacefaring species, so they're able to fight against the Turians. And I think they, I forget who ends up winning. I don't know if it was the humans or if they came to a truce because of the broader galactic
issues.
Well, no, because of the they were forced to do peace or something like that. The first contact war, which happens in 2157. So it was 10 to 15 years before Mass Effect 1. And they were introduced to the galactic community through that war.
Thank you for listening. Check out our podcast on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcasts if you enjoyed the show. For more books and inspiring stories from today's authors, please subscribe to our podcast.